Welcome to the Controversial Exchange. My name is Ryan O. I am your host. If this is your first time watching or listening in, we have two other episodes. The initial launch episode talking about what it is that we do, as well as an episode with Rick Kambita on standardization. So make sure you go check those out if you haven't already. Now, today, you probably clicked in because you saw that word deserve to branch outside of autism. It is a very fun, fruitful discussion. We cover a lot of different areas. We are trying to take a little bit of a systems perspective here, but we really dive into how effective have we been in two fronts, working with this population as behavior analysts, but also how well are we at really selling the potentials of our science? Yes, of course, we're doing things outside of autism already. The question and the title are a bit hyperbolic on purpose, but we believe the spirit of the question still stands. Oh, and a big announcement. There are over 100 people that are supporting and backing this channel now through Patreon. So if you are not already, consider jumping on to patreon.com/thedailyba. That is TheDailYBA, the Daily BA, and consider supporting. It's a values-based model, really helps us out. All right, let's get going.
For the record, I'm done trying to make y'all comfortable. For the record, you ain't trying to grow in the stump for you.
So today, myself and Dimitri are welcoming on Miranda Drake. Miranda, tell everyone what you do.
Hi there. My name is Miranda Drake. I am a BCBA and a clinical supervisor here in the Bay Area. I work with kids with autism, as many of us do, and I love it. I work in a clinic setting. I also do a little bit of in-home. Previously, I've worked in school settings. I was a classroom teacher for a little while for a classroom of kids with autism. I've been doing this a long time, and also just because it's relevant to my background and my experience, particularly how it relates to this topic. My brother, who is now 19, was diagnosed on the spectrum when I was 12 years old. So I've also grown up with around an autism diagnosis and everything that entails as far as being part of a family that is also handling that. So that's me.
Super glad to have you on. Thank you very much. So a little bit of backstory. I had asked folks about 6 months ago who was interested in submitting some topics to talk about within this behavioral psychology, behavior analysis world that would have a varying different viewpoints that maybe within our field people hold, but also people outside of our field may have contrasting viewpoints. And we wanted to dive in and pull those apart. So the title of this, the working title is, Do We Deserve to Branch Outside of Autism? Hopefully you're here and excited to listen to all the different perspectives that go into this. Let's see, we did a little bit of posting around. We may integrate some of the comments and thoughts and perspectives. And remember, the goal here is to dive into these different various perspectives and start the conversation and continue it going throughout the field, hopefully. So where do we want to start?
Well, I think wide scope wise, this is a broader issue of just general dissemination, which is something that our field has been commenting on and grappling with since since Noam Chomsky came in and decided to can I say shit all over Skinner, rip on Skinner, decades and decades ago. This is something that we've been struggle. I'll call it a struggle. We've been struggling with for a really, really long time. And this is really just kind of, a bit of a microscopic, a little atom of that larger issue that I think we grapple with a lot.
Yeah, and I'd say just a quick note on dissemination. We have a lot of folks that go out and do different things. I'm one of those. Like, if you, my general idea here is that if you post something on the internet, that's not dissemination. Like, the idea of dissemination is that there's some sort of adoption with integrity, right? Of the practices, tools, resources, whatever it is that we're putting out there, like they are being adopted as they were intended. Like, dissemination includes that practice, that tool actually being carried out. So simply, recording conversation like this and people listening to it wouldn't necessarily mean dissemination. I don't know if we're on the same page, but like that kind of drives me crazy sometimes. So just so listeners know where we're talking about here. Okay, so where do we want to go with this dissemination? What's the next?
Well, I mean, I guess the question that I have as far as that goes is that when you say tools and practice of it, I mean, do you mean that it has to actually result in tangible result, or does the intent or effort not matter? I mean, that's basically, so like if somebody's trying to do something special, or they're trying to get somebody to think behaviorally, or they're trying to bring about behavioral change through behavior analytic practice, and for whatever reason, there's institutional barriers, there's whatever cultural, organizational, whatever type of problem that's just not leading to the result, you're saying that that's not adequate. Is that what you mean by that?
Yeah, I think that's the goal that we're going to be exploring here. So like autism therapy as a behavior analyst is a perfect example. We have certain practices and things that we do. When we start to package those up, train those to other people, the question becomes, we intend for somebody to be well trained and be able to go out there and help provide these sort of services, but is it actually happening? Are we actually creating practitioners that go out there and actually affect the outcomes, right, that are in our research that we say that we can affect and such? Am I right here? Am I on track, Miranda?
Yeah, exactly. And to add to that too, the same with stakeholders, people who are actually receiving the services, whether this is the clients directly, whether these are clients' families, whether these are teachers in classrooms that we're working with, are they really adopting the principles that we are putting forth, and are they really buying into that? Or is it not actually grabbing hold for them?
Yeah, that's really good. Those are all really good questions, I think. What do you think?
In my experience, and from the anecdotal data that you see on social media, that I get in discussions with other practitioners at conferences, with my colleagues, it doesn't seem like it. It doesn't seem like it, at least to the extent to which our output is not matching what we're getting back as far as that goes, has been my experience, and I think there's a lot of reasons for this, and not to dwell on the history too much, but, as far as our applied science is concerned, we've largely been put into the area of working with populations that a lot of other fields do not really want to touch. They're difficult populations to work with. This has been our history. This has been where we're at. And those populations in general are people that are marginalized and ignored within our culture, within our society. People who were institutionalized, people with special needs, people with learning disabilities. These are individuals that, we want to say as a culture and a society that we really want to help, but oftentimes have been pushed aside. And I think we have oftentimes been pushed alongside with them, because that is where we have been the most effective. That is where we have had the greatest impact. And I think we see that a little bit now with how we've now moved into being really, really effective working with individuals with autism. And I think there's also, I'm getting really rambly here, but, then that just goes into, okay, like our principles and how they're actually applied and how they are effective, and how it isn't a quick cure. It isn't cannabis oil. It isn't, a gluten-free diet or a casein-free diet. There's a lot of variables going on, and I could go on and about it.
Gluten absolutely affects my moods continuously, my behavior. You're crazy. That's not between that and all the casein and BPAs, I've lost it.
It's done.
It's over. Yeah, it makes my immigration go nuts. Yeah, I don't disagree with what you're saying. For me, it's more like I guess I want to get more the historical factors. I think kind of put us in the box, and I think to the question that we're asking really is, do we deserve? It's more like, is that where we belong, or is it not? Or do we really belong everywhere else is the real question, right? It's like, because I feel we go to conferences, we have inner discussions between behavior analysts like us, and we sit around and like we're sitting around at a bar, and people just talk a bunch of shit about how, oh man, we should be solving the world's problems. We should be reading The Nurture Effect and changing the entire world, which is cool, but
Shout out Tony Biglin.
Yeah, but I mean, like, really, number one, do we have the wherewithal, the will, the money, the everything to do that, and are we willing and able to put forth the effort to make something like that happen, rather than just talk about the possibilities? I think that's another big thing. I feel like what we get caught into is we end up devolving into a discussion about philosophy, and not an actual conversation about action.
And I think that goes into that term deserve, right? And I think we had a couple of people on social media when we put out this sort of provocation of, how do you consider this question? And I was intentional with that word, the deserve aspect is, is it earned? Have we earned that? And my question is based on how we're doing within this field, that we should have, the most people singing our praises from the rooftops because we have access to, a population of, anymore. There's half the states in this country allow for insurance reimbursement for ABA services for an autism diagnosis. 1 in 59 individuals now are being diagnosed with autism. That's a large percentage of the population, an even larger percentage of the population know someone with or are directly affected by some, have someone in their life that has that diagnosis. There are teachers, there are therapists that we're working with directly. We go, oh, we're pigeonholed into this little tiny community. This community is vast. There are so many people touched by this, and we still don't have these people shouting from the rooftops the wonder that is behavioral science and the principles that we put forth and how helpful it is. Like, we can't even get through to them, and they are directly benefiting from what we are doing. If we can't do that, then no, we do not, in my opinion, we do not deserve to go further until we are able to refine to the point where the people that are benefiting the most from what we do actually care and believe in what we do.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that brings up so many thoughts. Like, is that a part of our tainted history, right? Does that go back to like folks like Skinner writing Beyond Freedom and Dignity and just like pissing everybody off?
It absolutely does. I mean, and I think that's the philosophical conversations are important. I think we'll definitely discuss how, the training that behavior analysts currently get lacks some pretty foundational knowledge in that philosophy, and those conversations at conferences that you have. I remember the first time someone asked me at an ACBS conference, it was a social worker who, was into like the acceptance and commitment therapy thing, but didn't really quite buy into radical behaviorism. Hey, does free will exist? They asked me that, and they're like, really? Free will doesn't exist? You want to tell me about that? And I was like, oh man, I sure don't. I sure do not want to have this conversation. But
I mean, it's the thing is about those kind of questions. Here's the thing, like a note to listeners, like if you're into all that stuff and the philosophy stuff, totally awesome. I love philosophy too. I have a degree in it. But what matters, that doesn't matter. Like no one cares. Like that's fun talk to have around. But
people do care. People care so much about free will. People care a lot about free will.
They shouldn't.
See, but that's.
I mean, they should.
And I don't.
Why does it matter? Even when I say they shouldn't, I mean,
puritanical, whatever. Like, there's whatever our roots are. As a culture, Western culture, we care so much about free will. And this is like getting way like now we're doing exactly what we're saying.
It's cool. Go. Well, I guess the reason I say we shouldn't is more as like if we're talking about dissemination, back to what Ryan was saying.
Sure.
Right. Like I feel like questions like that pull you into the weeds and force you to just lose sight of the point you're actually trying to make to begin with. Which is the whole point. It's like, why would we talk about, hey, well, do you believe in free will? Well, I mean, what about this covert behavior? How do you measure it? Can you apply a rate of response to it? And you start doing all these different things that really drag you out and don't let you just have a conversation about the actual thing you're talking about because for whatever reason, it's about supremacy, intellectual supremacy.
I totally agree that it can get you down a rabbit hole really quick that just does not matter. I think the point of that though is that our current training systems don't even teach people well enough what are the points in behavior analysis of the different worldviews that are, conceptual systems or whatever. And like, they don't even adequately teach that enough to where we can even have a conversation ourselves as a community, right? Like we run into those questions like you ran into, Miranda, where it's like, why do we even have to have this conversation? Why didn't we create a training system in the first place that taught people the foundations of our field?
Mm-hmm. And I think I agree with that. And just to bring it out of the weeds a little bit, I've had essentially lesser forms of that come up in training with families when I'm talking to them about how behavior is learned. They ask questions, well, like there's personality. My kid was born, just kind of a little spunky and like this is kind of just how they are. And I still struggle with how to talk around that and talk around that point and redirect them back to what we're doing and what I know scientifically to be correct. So, yes, those are philosophical conversations that are really fun to have at conferences, but they do make their way into practice in some form or another. And the fact that we do struggle to talk around those points, in using our more precise language and with our complex concepts, like if we can't do that, then trying to distill it down to where we can really defend what we're doing when we're actually in practice, it's difficult.
Yeah, no, it causes a huge problem. Some of my closest colleagues and I don't have the same background in understanding the foundations of our philosophy. So when it comes to discussions about what to do in the moment, practically, we can't see each other's perspective perfectly, I'd say, because we don't have that ability to even go, one person always, if you're not on the same page with what you have read or experienced when it comes to consuming the different parts of behavior analysis, then you can't start to have a conversation practically, I think. Like, that foundation matters.
Yeah,
that's a really good point. Yeah, you have to know what you're doing. You have to know how to dribble before you can play basketball, right?
Yeah, but it's not perceived that way when it comes to the philosophy of our field. And I think that's where
usually it's the other way around. People think that they get the more complex concepts later after they work the mechanistic.
After they have the practice,
stuff.
yeah.
Literally a mechanist versus contextualist, or a radical behaviorist versus methodological versus a epigenetic behaviorist. All those sort of people, functional contextualists, whatever, they are all going to look at the same psychological event or behavioral principles, sometimes a little bit differently. So if we don't know where we are at ourselves as a practitioner, on the philosophical level, that I look at, since all of our practice and our actual applied behavior analysis research and such is rested on one of those foundations. If you don't understand those different foundations, then it just becomes very quickly all these different camps, thoughts, and it also becomes opinions in our field as to who you want to subscribe to, and you get these kind of different religions, in a sense of
Your little guru.
We have all the different Protestants.
So
denomination. We're all part of a wider. There's little, yeah.
I think I'm getting in the weeds here again, but that point matters, and it impacts our practice. So where should we step next in this conversation?
Well, I think linked to that is, so there are the principles, there's the philosophy that, we struggle with, or a lot of practitioners struggle with grasping. And then what happens when they then try to actually go into practice and explain those principles and be effective with those principles, they revert to what's in the culture. A lot of it's mentalism, a lot of it's hypothetical construct to try and make a link. And then what happens is, what we're trying to say, what we actually believe, what we actually practice gets muddled and gets lost in translation. So, I mean, it becomes a big mess, I think. And that's been my experience when I've, in observing, colleagues and fellow practitioners attempting to effectively communicate our science to the people directly that we work with. And if we can't do that, then how are they then going to be able to, first of all, implement our procedures with fidelity, which is a whole other thing, just trying to do a behavior analysis of stakeholder, teacher, parent, etc. behavior and get them to be effective in providing what is necessary for their children diagnosed with autism, just to make it very specific, to make them successful. Being able to do that is really, really important. And then they aren't going to then be able to go out and disseminate on our behalf. So we're losing a large portion of people who could potentially be like, hey, I get this ABA therapy for my kid. And some of these principles, they line up with how my employees function and how I manage them at work. How can I pull this in? Is there something within this science that looks at that? And we can go, oh, actually, there's this little thing called OBM. We don't even get to have those conversations. We don't even get to that point.
Yeah, I kind of struggle with the idea of even separating behavior analysis into these little camps. I don't even know if they should exist. Like, I don't even feel like calling something OBM should be a thing, or calling something it should just all be behavior analysis. It's the principles are the same no matter how you apply them, really. I mean, there's going to be some contextual differences, right? Because
They are. An interesting point, though. I would challenge any of the listeners this week to go out and ask 3, 5, 10, 20 behavior analysts that you work closely to individually to write down the principles of behavior analysis and see if you get any sort of correlation across those. And consistency as well. It's phenomenal to me. And if you want to look, Ed Morris, very respected, prolific academic in our field, he's been working on a paper, I think, for like 5 or 8 years on trying to synthesize why this occurs, that we don't get this. So I agree with you on one hand of like, yeah, they shouldn't necessarily exist, because I think sometimes it's just made as a marketing move. Like, you make your thing, whether it's intentional for money and marketing, marketing move for some sort of capitalistic reasons, or if it's easier than to describe and tell people what it is that you're doing in your camp. I think that's why it happens.
I get that, and I think you're right there. I think that is why it happens, but I don't think that's that's why it happens, and that if that's necessary, that's necessary. My point is that if it's for those reasons, it's an irrelevant point to bring up more. You're having a conversation about the field and about the science with people, and internally, as people who share in the profession, the science, and the vocation, we should know. We should know who informed people are and who aren't. You would assume that someone who carries a certain certification or educational background can hang in some capacity, is the point that I'm trying to make there.
Yeah, and that's one of the points that was made. That was one of the points made by Todd Ward when we posted this up online. He was saying, like, we started, as a field that explored all options of behavioral influence. Like, what is it? We researched all those areas. I was taught to look at the basics of I was taught to approach the field and looking at the what are the principles of behavior and how do we apply these to all situations. I believe in that. I think Miranda's questions here are super relevant.
I absolutely agree. They're relevant. They're totally relevant. And the reason they're relevant is because, despite what I'm saying, the reality of the situation is exactly what you said, right? Is that you can ask 100 practicing behavior analysts right now in the field, and you would get different answers. And not only would you get different answers, I would bet dollars to donuts you would get wrong ones too. Like, you would get totally absurd, made up, like, arbitrary rules of engagement that are much more about dictating behavioral approach or problem solving, rather than actually looking at analyzing circumstances, antecedent variables, consequent variables, etc. So, like, I don't disagree with that at all, but I think it's a point to say that's how it is. That's not how it should be. And I think part of the discussion is having both at the same time. Sorry, that was like a...
No, it goes back to the wider point that the fact that we as science practitioners are unable to really grasp and explain our principles in a clear way means that those who directly contact our services, they don't become fully convinced that they're effective or understand why or how they're effective. And then how are we able to expect them to believe that ABA could be an answer to broader issues if that's getting all lost in translation? That's just not going to happen.
Let me ask you this question then. So obviously, basically, we're having a semantic discussion about, or really a philosophical one, about how people should think about it, or how they should go about talking about it. Well, how do you feel that our language influences the science, or the way that we practice it, or the way that we come off to other professions, or just in general, the way we communicate with each other?
I mean, I think I'll try and answer this, but I will defer to there are so many people that have written articles and have led workshops on this very thing, on the precision of our language and how it is both effective in making very, very clear, what our principles are, what our technologies are, but how it is so alienating to a wider audience. And there is something to that, I think. Sorry, go ahead, Ryan.
I was going to say, you're talking about, like, one of the references that we've all kind of listed here was Critchfield et al. In 2018, talking about this exact thing, right?
Yeah. So that looked at, that one was looking at culture specifically. Yeah, and then you have the class, Fox 1996. So what, 23 years ago now, translating Covenant, which is that we were grappling with this long before that article was written in 96. And we continue to be grappling with that.
Can I just thank you for sharing? That was what I was going to say earlier before we started. I loved that article so much. Like,
okay,
it made me warm in special places. I love this. His words are so scathing to the people who are just like smelling their own farts. I loved every second of the whole thing. I loved it all.
No, it's brilliant.
It's so good. I'm such a Richard Fox fanboy. It's ridiculous. And that article is really good. I'd never
his keynote at Calaba last year. Anyway, we could get into it. Yeah. I got a big crush on him too. He's great.
What about the Attila versus the Guru thing? Because that kind of follows what you said, right? Like, he gives, like, in that article, he says there's that Attila the Hun versus the Guru. Because, and Ryan, this kind of goes back to our previous discussion about the cognitivism versus behaviorism piece of, our perceptions kind of put us in these boxes, right? Like, we were talking about how, like, in autism, it's like a small niche community, and it almost seems like people come to us as a last resort, and we've kind of been relegated as the intervention of last resort. And actually, he talks about that too, and it kind of does feel that way, where people do all the soft stuff, quote unquote, like whatever that means, soft stuff, until they have to do the hard stuff, like we're the meth of intervention, but whatever. I mean, like, whatever. And it seems like we're perceived as like these hardcore cold scientist types, and all the school psychologists or whatever, counselors, social worker type people, they are these benevolent gurus that are Mother Earth types who are here to just foster growth and peace and prosperity in one's inner self. Like, how do we overcome that perception? Because I think what all this boils down to is perception. Perception is reality, right? And the reality is, going back to our earlier part of our discussion, is that our history is marred with poor demonstrations of the science, poor practice of the science, very, loose is not even the word, just really harsh, staunch effects of punishment and behavior mod. And that put us in this zeitgeist, in the eyes of the people, right, as these torturers, or like these horrible people who manipulate and control people to get outcomes. And then you contrast that with those other types of psychologists or whatever, and they're these really nurturing people who want to see people do well. And that puts us in a really negative light, no matter how you slice it. And I don't know how we overcome that, but I think that feeds into this. So how do you feel like we look at that, or how do we start shaping that?
I actually have a lot of hope for that particular point. I think that that's actually my observation, and I'll explain a little bit of that in just a second, is where we've actually improved a lot more. And I think that's happened in a couple of ways. That's been us branching out into just geographically other areas. I worked for about 3 years in Australia as a behavior therapist and as a program supervisor. It was a very, very, very new field. And again, don't have data on this, but my experience was that, I was perceived as a behavior therapist coming in as one of those nurturing people who was in the home, who was working with these families that, had lost hope to a certain point. They didn't quite have that same, the history that we have here in the US and in Europe, I think a little bit too, wasn't as pervasive. So that was really, really, so I felt like I was representing a true caring profession in a lot of ways that was still very much rooted in that hard science. I think another thing is you have a lot of people who are becoming practitioners who started in those roles. You have a lot of teachers who, they're in a classroom and a BCBA comes in and is effective with their learners, and they see that and they say, wait, I can be potentially more effective of an educator if I actually pursue behavior analysis. And they're bringing in, their history of, many people who go into special education are those people that are extremely caring, who are able to communicate really, really effectively with families, who just do present themselves as very, very compassionate people, and who are very compassionate people. And we do have them coming into the field as well. I look at, my clinic in particular, not to brag it up, but it's a very warm, loving place. There's toys around, the RBTs are playing with the kids. It looks like a preschool in a lot of ways. It looks like a daycare center. We're seeing a little bit more of an aesthetic shift into that direction as well, which I think is hopefully addressing that point of, us being perceived as the behavior modifiers who come in and are just cold and, change what needs to be changed and leave. And we leave the warm fuzzies to the counselors and LMFTs and psychologists of the world. Again, just from my own personal experience and observation, but I'd like to think that and hope that we're doing a little bit better, at least in that regard.
Yeah, there's definitely a rift between the two different types still, for sure. But like last year, I visited a handful of centers that were like going through that transformation process over like a 10-year period, and the feel of walking into those places, right, are so much more enjoyable as a fellow behavior analyst to be able to walk into an environment that's like that, as opposed to the ones that are just very staunch. So I don't know, that feeling, I think, is probably what other people are feeling in some sort of way too when they come and drop their child off for therapy. It's very different.
That does kind of force the other question though, which is the inverse, which is, does having that other kind of group develop in that way create this dichotomy where there are opposing views and therefore idiosyncratic ways of implementing behavior analytic principles?
Well, yeah, that's kind of it. Like our bread and butter research was looking at the traditional Lovaas approach, right? So are we actually systematically evaluating this as we should, with variety of different types of research designs, including the group RCTs and such, to actually understand, is this working? There's not a lot there. There's not a lot.
And even easier. So like group RCTs, like, that's a lot to tackle, but even something as simple as like, a large inventory looking at social validity, like what we're not really even gathering this information, that would be relatively simple, to actually look at. But yeah.
Dude, social validity is one of those things that everybody talks about, but I don't think anyone
nobody does.
Well, not even does. I don't even think they really understand what it is. And I'm not here to say that I do either, but it just seems that I was part of a team that was doing I don't know what the project is currently, but we were trying to do a meta-analysis where we're going through all the years of Java and running each article through like a checklist of, does it meet one of all the dimensions of behavior, right? And well, obviously one of them is, social validity. And we're like, okay, is it socially valid, or is there some type of measure or something of that? And like, of all the ones I did, at least it was something like 80% of them, if not more, had nothing, like no metric for it, nothing. And the ones that did have a metric, it was a really poor Likert scale of some sort, that was completely subjective. And maybe that's the only way to do it. I honestly am not an expert at that, but I don't know. I feel like social validity is one of those things that we measure the wrong outputs of that, in my opinion, from what I see, because we measure client satisfaction as social validity and not actual client outcomes typically. And that creates, in my opinion, a conflict sometimes between professionals, where you have the pleasers and the people who are looking to get something done. And then the pleasers may make everybody feel really good, but aren't getting the results. And the other people are getting the results, but don't make people feel good. And it's like, where do you find the in between there, where you can make people feel good about getting results? And I don't know which way you go about to get that or how to do it, but that's the problem that I run into, because I get accused of being that cold person. So I mean, just in all fairness, I totally on that. Like I get accused of being that guy. And it's because, making somebody feel good is great and wonderful, and it creates a more nurturing world. But if they feel good and are still failing or experiencing the negative impacts of the problem that brought them to you in the first place, you did not do your job. Like, your job is to actually create behavior change. It's not to make people feel good about hoping they were doing some things to make behavior change. So I don't know. that seems to be a regular thing that I find myself in, where I don't want to put at odds, but definitely at odds with people who are like, hey, chill out. And I don't know how you go about fixing that, or how you go about even having that discussion without it devolving. And not to bring up a different conversation, because this is a topic probably for a different podcast for sure. But I mean, like, that kind of brings up the discussion about, how actually goes back to language, punishment, extinction, and how we perceive those terms. How do we look at aversives across the board? I watched the presentation that Joe Lang did at NextGen, Ryan, and it was interesting. I loved the fact that he showed that inverse effect of reinforcement, which is punishing, right? Like, you're maybe increasing a behavior you want to see, but in turn you're suppressing another one. So you're basically punishing it out. We can call it a horse of a different color if we'd like, but I mean, when it boils down to it, the effect is decreasing the future likelihood of behavioral response, which is the definition of punishment.
Yeah, no, there's some interesting differences in conceptualizations of punishment. That goes back to what I was saying. Like, we can't even have that conversation between a bunch of behavior analysts at a bar usually, because we don't have the adequate history to be able to have those conversations in the first place. And I'm not blaming someone for that. If anything, it's the larger institutions not working together and all the different systems is what's going on. But what was I going to say?
I know, man. This is so hard to stay on track.
I know, it really is.
Free form?
You're thinking faster than you're talking, and then it just goes.
This is awesome, though.
What was your
guys know, just a quick time.
No, this is a
I'm
blast.
having super fun, buddy.
What was your point, Dimitri?
Huh?
What was your main point?
I have no idea.
What did you say last?
Well, we're talking about how the
Joe Lang, functionally, yeah.
Oh, yeah. Okay, cool. So I think the reinforcement punishment thing would be a fun thing to dive into in its own topic. That's all I was going to say.
For sure. Yeah.
Let's slate that over.
Definitely. I was more talking in terms of words, though, like just as words themselves, and precision in language, and like maintaining that degree of precision of language really creates a lot of conflict, man. Because one of the reasons I got out of philosophy, and because every single time I'd start reading something cool and having a conversation about it, or listening to a professor talk about it in class, was that it always devolved into a semantic conversation and never a conversation about actual meaning. So there was never that.
And that's why people are turned off by not even reading and getting into that sort of stuff. Because I think the built-in reinforcers for the people that do know it well are like getting into those, right? Like, it starts to shift, and then the other folks don't want to get into it. I've ran this course, and this is why I suck as a supervisor, like a formal supervisor in behavior analysis, is I don't get back to the practicalities of it. I know Miranda's seen that when we talk about practice things in the little group that we share. Like, I don't do good at it. So,
well, meaning is what matters, though. I mean, that's the whole point of what we're trying to do here.
Yeah. So I know at some point we have a few different perspectives we want to get into as well. Have we done this one justice? Do we need to keep going? How are you feeling, Miranda? I'm
feeling good. I think we've hit a lot of it, hopefully in a way that flows well-ish. But we've covered the heart of, like, everything, as far as, there's this population that that should be singing our praises from the rooftops, and we should have no trouble theoretically having on board and willing to be foot soldiers in a lot of ways and disseminate our science for us, if we really are as amazing as we think we are at what we're doing within the autism population. There's obviously issues surrounding that, which we discussed, our history, our language, the precision of our language, and the alienation that comes alongside that. I think the big thing we haven't touched on as much is my third viewpoint, which was direct service workers, and that being something that is a struggle. And yeah, I don't even know where to start with that.
Well, I mean, I'll ask you a question. As far as the direct service thing goes, and this whole topic is, how do you think their backgrounds influence our ability to really disseminate in the field? Because one of the things that I'm just noticing from this, and the point that you brought up here is inexperienced supervisors have a tendency to not necessarily do things the right way to inspire people and that kind of thing. But on the inverse too, you have a lot of low qualified, less educated people with lower skill sets involved in that direct actual practice piece. And that creates kind of like a, I don't know, really weird situation where you have someone with almost too much education instructing people with not enough education. And then like creates this kind of like soup of, I don't know, challenges.
It is. There's like this weird chasm that it's like we keep trying to throw stuff into to make this bridge, but it just like dissolves and it doesn't quite grab. So as far as, you know, the learning history of the direct care workers that we're getting, right? I mean, people who we'll even like focus in a little, people who are RBTs, people who have actually gone through, you know, a 40-hour training, who are supposed to be, I say supposed to be because I don't believe it's happening, receiving 5% of their hours supervised directly by a certified behavior analyst. You know, they are. It's a varied background. They have anything from like a high school education through a master's degree. You know, we're dealing with a very, very diverse population, which is in one case super exciting, right? You know, where we have people who are coming from very different backgrounds, education, location, and experience, and they get, you know, exposed to these behavioral principles, and they get to see them in action. Like that's actually pretty neat in a lot of ways, but it does come with a set of challenges. You know, we know that working with learning history in general is complex, that addressing the issues that come up because of that learning history, that it's oftentimes takes a nuanced approach to really be able to look at those contingencies and respond in a way that is actually going to have effective change.
I want to acknowledge the attempt of the board, like putting in these sort of things is great to protect the consumer. The practicality is always like super interesting. I would also agree with you on like, is that 5% really happening? And
in a meaningful way,
A note to some RBTs real quick. Like before RBTs, there was still interventionists forever. We've all lived that.
I was one for a very long time.
Yeah, I had a quick
for a
story
lot longer than most behavior analysts, you know.
Yeah. I have a quick story that may be relevant. Like my training as a interventionist literally consisted of, I applied to a place to start working with adults with intellectual disabilities. This was a one-on-one sort of scenario. They were all one-on-one, and the majority of it was graduate students that were running the program, undergraduates that were actually doing the one-on-one work. I came in, the director walked in, sat down, and he said, "You've taken a course in applied behavior analysis at UNR, right?" And I was like, "Yeah." And he closed the computer for the training, which was a 1-hour training. It was a 1-hour training. And he closed the computer and he slapped me on the arms. He's like, "Don't use those and don't get bit." And that was it. Like I was then qualified to sit down and work with somebody with an intellectual disability, according to the standards. Yes. Now, granted, the culture there in the place knew that was a thing that happened. So there was undergraduates and some graduate students there that were immediately there to help and aid in that. So when it comes down to like, was that ethical in that sort of scenario? No. Was it a practice that was then identified by other analysts in the area that were corrected upon? Like I was taken upon under somebody's wing within 2 hours of like being in that situation. I was not working with somebody. I was shadowing in those first 2 hours, just to kind of clarify here. But that shit still happens. Like I'm sure that shit still happens all over the place. Maybe less so. I would hope so in behavior analysis organizations, but state institutions and all the places that we're at, when you're talking about the true prevalence rates and the number of workers that are in these places, it's such a mess. Like I don't think that's it. Like I doubt I shared that experience. I'm sure I shared that experience with other people.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
And people with the RBT thing probably are still running into this too, right? You can you can slam through your course, and then you can jump in and start working with people if that is what your history has shaped you up to do.
Yeah, no, the discrepancy in quality of training and ongoing supervision is huge and is something that needs to be addressed. And it is great, again, give credit where credit's due, that is happening. It is starting to become more of a thing. I mean, the contingencies are there, right? You have insurance, which is a beast in and of itself. And I don't know if you're tackling that as a topic, but, you know, funding. Yeah. So, but, you know, what it has done is that insurance companies now in the state of California where I am, they require you to be an RBT. They require that. So are the direct care workers largely RBTs here? Yeah, very, very quickly. The first thing you do is you get that training and you get that credential lined up. So definitely better than Ryan's experience of do your thing, bye, which was pretty similar to, my, 15 years ago when I started as a developmental technician. That's what we were called. So I think there's definitely the contingencies are in place, just tangibly, if we want to get paid for services, we have to be providing that. And I don't think that's the worst thing at all. I think there's definitely other things that come into play when we're looking at funding and how we, stay in the good graces of our funders. That can be problematic. That's a different conversation. But one of the things that has come out that is, I think, beneficial is that there is a little bit more oversight in that regard. That doesn't mean the oversight's great. And I think that's where things get tricky.
The point for any young analysts or RBTs listening on this is that a statement of your values aligning across, anybody or any entity in our field does not necessarily mean that the contingencies are set up to influence that behavior, right? Just because we say this is something we need to be doing, that is not the end all be all. It sounds a little crazy and easy to say, just like we should be using behavior analysis to do our behavior analysis, but we should, and we don't all the time as a field.
Yeah. And I mean, I do think the billing practices do get in the way of us providing some better support for direct care service providers, whether that's, new practices where you can't technically bill alongside an RBT. There are some things that are happening there. Again, this might be very California specific. That's where I'm coming from. There's, people trying to get as many hours, but they're working in home, they're driving everywhere, they're getting there, they're updating programming, they don't have a ton of time. They aren't there when, the RBT is actually in the throes of trying to address a significant issue with problem behavior, or they're struggling to prompt, correctly. They aren't necessarily there on call. That makes things tricky as well. And I think just going back to our foundational education, the RBTs, these are adults with varying experience. A lot of them ask really, really hard questions. And then a lot of behavior analytics supervisors do not have good answers. They don't have the training or the skills in actually distilling our principles in a way that's accessible to them. And I think this results in a lot of resentment as well.
I literally at the Florida Association of Behavior Analysis conference in 2018 listened to a representative of the BCBA say that we have grown faster than almost any other professional organization that is similar to us. The rate of our growth we cannot keep up with, and it's interesting from so many ways. I don't know if this is getting too far in the weeds, but from a business perspective, you're saying we're going to meet this 1:59 ratio as the only field that can really provide the adequate treatment, but we're going to send people to go drive an hour or two to sessions. When you start to scale that up, all of a sudden it's okay, how many hours are we spending as a community in cars, right? Is this actually doable? I don't know. It's
yeah. I mean, does it that goes back to that continues to beg the question on whether or not, how does funding impact what we do, and whether or not the way that we're asking to be funded too makes sense, and how does the business side fit into it? And back to what you said before, I wrote this down. I wanted to get back to for the regulation piece, and we don't do behavior analysis to implement behavior analysis. I mean, yes and no. I mean, ultimately the underlying thing is that we should be pragmatists, right? So if the conditions are not currently present for us to do the most pure version of behavior analytic critical thinking to solve whatever problem we have, then we take those variables and we do it within the limitations that are presented to us, right? So I don't know if necessarily it should be an expectation for us to do the most purely behavior analytic thing in order to get a behavior analytic outcome. I think the thing that you should be shooting for is to do the most practical, pragmatic thing, and then run it through the principles that you can to get it. So to your point, whether or not driving makes sense, well, driving makes sense because that's the only way that we can get paid. And if that's the only way we can get paid, then we need to look at how we're asking to be paid and how we're advocating for that payment.
Which is shout out to Matt Norman and his wife. I'm gonna have to link that article. They worked on a piece just talking about that. Like, if we really want to be focusing on this, we need to be working on creating jobs for graduate students and others that are outside of, and like basically looking at that capitalistic angle.
Yeah, the free market decides, man. When it's all said and done, money talks, bullshit walks, and the reality is that, you can't eat hopes and dreams. So people.
No, it's perfectly valid, and it's this. My husband's actually an economist, and with these are the these wider kind of macro contingencies. We talk about these all the time, right? Because I'm coming at it from this behavior analytics standpoint. He's talking about like the economics of it, and you've got to find a way to really consider those and to actually derive some information from it and then implement something that can actually address all those issues, because it's huge.
So, I mean, back to the direct care staff thing, do you think part of it too is that maybe we don't push back enough for what resources we actually need to get it done and what's reasonable or realistic for how we could get certain direct care staff to be able to do it rather than regulate it? Because what I'm seeing with the RBT is like, RBT is designed to produce some minimal proficiency in behavioral principles, right?
Sure.
How do you do what is reinforcement? How do you do that stuff? But then, taking an idea like that and putting it into practice is crazy different. And it requires an actually pretty sophisticated point of view. And it also requires a significant amount of follow-up to keep it going. But we know the economics of it don't permit that. So is it that maybe we need to pull back a little bit? Maybe the real way to create the change is to, rather than looking to meet the need, looking to restrict the flow even more so as to stress the contingency and create that degree of strain to increase the reinforcement.
So is that BCBA for actually providing direct therapy more?
I mean, I don't even mean that, actually. I mean, limit the amount of people that you're willing to do and charge.
In a sense, that's exactly what's going on in Florida, right? With Medicaid.
Yeah.
Medicaid's saying, let's pause so that we can work with the people that we have currently. And you can see how much that pisses our own field off, how much it can potentially limit services. But it does, I think it's a good point, Dimitri. Like, that could be a way for us to get our shit together.
I mean, there's this whole idea in economics of scarcity, right? And I was listening to Hassan Minhaj, which I did not think was cool, and I watched his show on Netflix, and I think it's awesome. And he was talking about Supreme, and I didn't even know what that was. You know what Supreme is? I bet you know.
Brand.
Ryan knows what Supreme is. Yeah. So Supreme is this brand. It's basically this brand that has copped every other brand on the planet, and its whole point, it's part of like drop culture. And like the whole idea behind it is that they create limited runs of things, kind of like, Yeezys, which are shoes. And by dropping this limited run of stuff from crowbars to hoodies, they create this thing where they sell out of their stuff to the max. And then they create this secondary market where people want it really bad. And it drives the price up insane. Where literally, I think there was one thing he had where there's a Supreme crowbar, which is like, what? It's almost something out of a video game. It's so absurd.
And it's probably running for like $3,000, right?
Dude, it costs $30, I think, if you got it, one of the 5,000 they made. But now that they're sold out, if you go on eBay, I think it's something like $400.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
And I'm not saying that we want to pull a Supreme here as a field, because we're talking about people's lives and we're talking about being able to help them and serve them and create the conditions of actual substantive, socially significant culture change. But on the flip side, I think that being intellectually and financially and just from a humanistic perspective, just honest about the limitations that we're encountering in a result of that, is not a crazy thing. Like, if you don't respect yourself, you don't respect the field, you don't respect you as a professional, then how do you, it's ridiculous to think that anyone else that doesn't understand what you do to respect you too. And like that to me is a boundaries problem. That's rather than that's where the hyper nurturing, the overcompensation in reaction to the behavior mod rep that we have has pushed us in the wrong direction, where it's just like, take everybody, do everything, do whatever you can. And that's created it's created the conditions that we're in currently. It's not optimal.
And this might be a branch off that, and it's more of a personal disdain that I have, but we rely on just a couple key people or a very small percentage of people that are potentially having the conversations and dictating the way that's going to go for the future of our field, right? Like, all of a sudden, behavior analysts receive a CPT code update email in their folder, and then all hell breaks loose for 6 weeks, right? Like,
Don't even get me started. This has been my
yeah.
I'm so outside of that world. I work in education, so like, I had a
This make me miss education for a hot second.
I had a CAQ number for like 6 months, and then I got the hell out of that. Now I don't have to worry about those things. So I hear CPT codes and I zone out immediately. Like they lose. I'm like, I don't care about that. I don't need to worry about that. But,
yeah, and I'm not.
But a lot of us do, and it is. Yeah, it's definitely a variable in how we're practicing right now. You know, it's as far as like response. Where we're allocating responding right now is like companies, like that's where it is. It's not, hey, how can we support continuing education? How can we make our RBT supervision better? No, like right now everyone's like dealing with this.
Yeah, and to tie these together, Dimitri, I think your point's good on like we not that we need to create the supreme brand, but by stepping back and demonstrating that if we are this valuable, that we do have leverage to stop and actually talk with the right stakeholders on this is the problems we're facing, and we need to be met halfway because you need us as much as we may need you to make this happen. And if you have to, like, I don't know, financially figure out how to incentivize that so that you can work with those sort of MCOs or whoever, then cool. But and maybe that's happening, but I don't see any sort of communication about trying to get the larger, broader certificate community really involved. And that's usually been my biggest issue is like, I think you have a lot of really brilliant, smart folks across all levels of certificate holders, and a little meeting with some subject matter experts now and then I don't think is adequate enough. And I know that's expecting a lot, but I think that's respectable to ask for that.
I think, Miranda, I'm sorry. I don't mean to interrupt if you're getting ready. Okay. But one thing to that point is the cult of personality problem, man. You know, Skinner is a philosopher king in what we do, right? You know, everything that he ever said or did is like, it's almost biblical if you're a behavior analyst. And it seems that each generation, and when I mean generation, I mean like in a science sense, generations run what, 10 to 15 years? Or actually, Fox said 20 in the article, which was interesting. But he's totally right about that, in that we have this desire to be led by great leaders in the field who will drive the way we do our practice. And that, in my opinion, is a result of that not teaching critical thinking skills, not teaching those analytic skills that are necessary, not doing all that stuff. And we keep looking for those big personalities who will drive the field, those subject matter experts who will tell us what to think and how to do this stuff. And that, as long as we're looking for that and permitting that to be the status quo, that's how it's going to be. It's going to be driven by smaller communities who segment away from each other rather than coming together as like one big behavior analytic tribe, you know, rather than all these little feuding tribes that we've become, whether you're contextual behaviorist, functional, well, you know, like you said before, that brings us full circle, I think.
Just to bring that back down, how does that look on the ground then? What the current model is? So it's obviously it's what we're seeing now, but you know, like really, like what are the critical features of what we're currently seeing, that what needs to be addressed?
Yeah, that's a really hard question. I don't know how to answer that question without coming off completely condescending or patronizing.
I think
so. If I were to answer that, I would want to preface it with like, I'm not perfect and I don't know what the hell I'm talking about either. I'm just some dude talking shit on the internet. So
I think the first, I agree with Dimitri's like feel here. Like I feel that as well. But one thing that I read, which gets back to like those things that you read when you're in the weeds, was J.R. Cantor's like interbehavioral approach of looking at a logician of science. And this doesn't have to be one person, but it would be essentially functioning as an entity that would look at what are all the areas that we're doing really well in, not doing well in, what do we know, not know, and let's bring those back together and kind of reset the course. One thing that I think that is really like a way to maybe see this between communities is the acceptance and commitment therapy community is pretty darn good at organizing themselves to look at what research needs to be done. I'm not saying that this doesn't happen in select areas of more traditional ABA, right, and our sort of camps, but the fact that they as a community came together over a course of roughly 25 years to create 120 plus RCTs on questions that needed to be answered in a sort of staggering fashion because they wanted to randomized control trial. the fact that they wanted to, as a community, be able to play or sit at the table and actually have the discussions with the people that did value like that sort of stuff. That is in a way like a demonstration of what I think we could be doing largely as a community of behavior analysis, as a whole, ACT included in that community and others. But
even ACT has their God. Steve Hayes is their leader.
Oh, I didn't know we were dropping names.
Well, I mean, he's published and exists. I mean, are you kidding me? Like
dude, when you're the top 1,000 people cited in history ever, and
I mean, they have
that's like Jesus
their persona.
Like,
Not that he's not amazing, by the way. P.S. And the more I read, the more blown away I am. But what I'm actually, but I mean that goes to the point I was trying to say before, though, is that we seem to be, as a community, we need leadership, man. It's weird. It's like we're seeking authoritarian figures.
I would agree. Yes, and I would say yes and no. We have the leadership. The question is, again, is the leadership stating that they value the same thing, or are they putting the contingencies in place to actually move us forward as a larger community and culture? So, like the Steve et al. Of the ACBS community, ABI, BACB, everyone coming together and making this coalition of behavioral sciences this summer. Cool. Stated values are in this right direction. That's awesome. The fact that folks in the BACB could actually invite and bring people from ABI, which to my knowledge hadn't happened for years or decades, to actually have a conversation. Cool. Good first step. Get over it and let's move forward. Let's work on actually aligning these contingencies, rather than just a statement of them, or a statement of them and then action in a very small room, isolated somewhere at a convention. Why aren't we deploying the resources, the smart people in our field, and working on a much larger community level of solving these sort of problems? I see Patreon communities that are working with, or subreddits, right, that work with 10,000 people to build solutions overnight. We can get pissed off enough to go after Shia LaBeouf and find his flag by running trigonometry, right? But we as behavior analysts and masters of behavior, we can't organize our own resources. We are damn smart when it comes to behavior. Ego definitely runs into it with everybody, man. Yeah, I would be lying if I didn't say that at some point I got pissed and didn't let my own didn't have my own ego at some point get in the way of anything I was trying to do on a small community level. I try to constantly keep that in check, and I have some folks that do that, but I can't imagine being a part of something that's 10,000 or 50,000 people that you're representing and what that does. I can't put myself in those shoes, but no behavior analyst is good enough not to step away from those sort of things. The question is, do you have the checks and balances in your system to make sure that you're accounting for that? And I don't know.
Yeah. Wow. That bleeds into a whole nother podcast we have planned, which is what is the influence of higher education and the hierarchical structures within it, and how does it create a certain top-down point of view in our field, which kind of feeds this whole conversation.
Yeah. And to get into trying to more specifically answer what you were asking of where could we go next, and bring up Cantor's logician of the science, I think you would have to look at the academics, the certification boards, the entities that are funding, the people that are playing around on new media, right? The power of new media, I think, is underrepresented, undervalued by some people in our field. Not as the end all be all. Any of these are. They all have to come together and really strategically work together. I'm pretty excited for the fact that some of us are going to be talking at ABI this year about how do we maybe align these sort of things more to where you concurrently we're putting out, media that aligned with some of the things that are going on in other places. Not that that's going to happen. We haven't discussed how to make that happen. But the fact that we're going to have a discussion around would that even be valuable? I think, yes, it makes sense. But it would be looking at all the different variables. I did not state, like I should have, people that are receiving our services and the stakeholders, like their parents and such. Those people, in addition to everything else I listed before, those folks coming together, I think that's the starting point as to how you would solve this. What do we need to concurrently all work towards? And I've seen that in some ways in that ACT community that I was referencing.
But to be fair, ACT delivery is a very different model. That's a mental health model that's being implemented in, which has the person of the highest certification, whether they're a counselor, psychologist, whatever, directly implementing the therapy. And this gets back to, that direct service component, which is how do we then bridge that gap to be effective? You know, we're talking about a service that's provided 1-2 hours a week by a highly skilled, highly trained, hopefully, individual versus 30, 20, 35, 40 hours a week. Someone who's gone through a 40-hour RBT training, is there something there within the service model that has to be shifted? Obviously
that goes back to pulling back. In our desire to meet the need, we've created a situation where we dissolve, and I mean like the behavior analyst in this situation, right? So in the attempt to meet the need that's out there, we've created a situation where we create mini us's, which is basically what it is, that technically don't have the technical knowledge completely. They know what we give them, really, if we're being technical about it. And then we go and we say, okay, well, this is the best we can do with what we have, and it's better than zero. So zero is better, something's better than nothing, so we're doing a good job. And in reality now, because the needs continues to grow, the demand continues to grow exponentially, it seems, and we continue trying to maintain this model that is unsustainable over time, and it's producing results that a lot of people are unhappy about. I mean, we're sitting here talking about it because how frustrated we are with it.
I find myself sometimes referencing like the macro level then happens, like in what's, fast forward 10 to 15 years down the road, and the good should survive, right? Like the best services should reign out. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, that's in a perfect world, that's true, dude. But I mean, like,
I agree. That's what I don't.
That's not how
it's not necessarily it's not necessarily the services that are again, going back to those critical features of how you make an organization survive.
The world's not fair.
If we've learned anything from the current administration, it's the perceived sense of whether or not you're surviving, right?
I mean, it's just, fair.
But I think the service delivery, it is an interesting question. And I mean, like, even like now I'm like, ooh, can I just, for funsies, like, I'm not going to put together an RCT anytime soon, but, can I go in and like pull a program and do a little, just do a little analysis, be like, I'm going to teach this program. I'm going to sit down with this learner and I'm going to see, like, is my acquisition rate better than my RBT? Like, really, are my skills and my expertise, that much better? Or like, what are those? Pardon?
I bet you $1 billion it is.
Well, yeah, with 15 years and, and everything that I have under my belt, I would hope so. But, it's an interesting question. And I don't know that it necessarily answers then, okay, within the current model, then how do we support these individuals because there's, I think there's a lot, there's a lot of RBTs or a lot of individuals within that particular community find themselves disgruntled, and it's a very stressful job. I mean, there are some, we are starting to look a little bit at, how to prevent burnout, address those particular issues, for sure. But really, a lot of, this is also, I think we discussed in our pre-chat a little bit about just like the neurodiversity movement and people who have autism who are speaking out against ABA. You have a lot of vocal people both from that area, and then a lot of people who tout themselves as former behavior interventionists who are just totally turned off by their experience. It seems at the very least we should be able to prevent that from occurring, and at the very best we should be supporting these direct service workers to be extremely effective and satisfied in what they're doing, and we're not doing that. Instead, oftentimes what we get are angry blog posts of former interventionists who are disgusted by what they observed, and probably had a lackluster experience, and also probably don't have a good understanding of exactly what was going on. So
haters gonna hate.
Gonna hate.
Haters gonna hate. I mean, who cares?
T-Swift.
Part of that,
you can't get everybody to love you all the time.
No.
I don't know
but it'd be nice if there were more vocal people.
That's true.
That loved us.
People who loved us more a lot about
vocal people who hate us.
Yeah,
even if we could just tip those scales. That's like really all I'm asking.
You just presented the Yelp problem, the ultimate Yelp problem. Is that like, God?
Yeah, the people who have the shitty experiences they're the ones leaving the reviews.
Exactly. That's the way it goes, man.
Do we need to change our ethics code? Should we allow for, more blatant testimonials? Like, what does that look like?
I don't know. That's a really good question. I think that I don't know. My honest to God, raw answer to that completely, like, not sitting down thinking about it and filtering it is picking a fight with them and seeing where it goes. But that's just because I tend to like to confront those kind of problems.
Yeah.
But I don't know what the answer is to that, because every single industry, every single vocation, every single anything that has any impact on the world has its opposition. I mean,
Yeah.
there are people who think democracy is egregious. You know what I mean? So
There's people that think the world's flat. I mean,
Yeah.
of course.
oh my God, just not to go down this rabbit hole. Okay. But just for funsies, side thing. Have you guys seen some of the videos from the Flat Earth Convention just for fun?
No, I've
Okay.
avoided those, but I know of them.
Just for fun, if anyone's bored and needs to laugh out loud at how absurd certain people are, they should YouTube Flat Earth Convention and watch some of those videos, because it's pretty awesome. And by the way, they're growing by the thousands.
It's shaping into like a religion.
Dude, I believe they have like they have like over 250,000 people that are part of like the Flat Earth
Scientology
Society.
again.
Man,
So more than BACB certificate.
Which
is crazy, right? There's more flat earthers than behavior analysts. They outnumber us.
Yeah. I think, I don't know, that was kind of the point of this podcast in a sense, was like, let's create the discussion that we'd like to see perpetuating more. I think.
Yeah, I hope people weren't coming to us for answers to this question necessarily.
Yeah.
I mean, honestly though, if they did,
provided some, but yeah.
well, if
Sorry,
they did,
guys.
the answer is this: is that like I like to take the Richard Dawkins approach to these things. I say that, and Christopher Hitchens, make fun
Way
of
to
it.
use some charged words.
I mean, no, for real, make fun of
Right.
them and tell them how dumb they are and prove them wrong. I mean that, and I know that seems like a really intense, like confrontational approach to it, but I mean, passive. Well, my God, passive
Which
is one thing.
passivity?
But like passivity, yeah, is one thing.
Passivity.
But I mean, like, is that it?
Pacifist.
Yeah, I don't know. Whatever.
You
Someone will
know-
correct
you
us.
know English, man. That's sorry. My English is words are hard. But I mean, like,
See,
but I mean,
what's
like, at some point in time, mockery matters. It's a reductio ad absurdum. Okay, is a form of debate. Reduce the argument to absurdity, which is mock it, and then demonstrate like the proper logical replacement for it.
culturally, what's really interesting on that note, Dimitri, is we are allowed to do that in our peer-reviewed journals. It is okay for Palmer and Hayes to argue about VB versus RFT. It is okay to destroy somebody outside of our field about an autism therapy, research article. They didn't have the right appropriate methods. If you want to look at some of the work that Autism Partnership and Justin Leaf and all of them have been working on tackling this sort of stuff. But when it comes to questioning the practices in a medium that's not an academic journal, like I've been hitting literally with like floods of emails and direct messages on like, please stop what you're doing. And it's like, listen, the point isn't invalid because I put it in a medium. I didn't put it in the right, it's not in the right topography. I'm sorry. Like we're behavior analysts. Like we should be able to start tackling these sort of things.
The risk, and I think just to bring it back to then my where I'm at in practice, like I can't do that to a parent. I can't mock them, and that what therapeutic rapport am I going to have? Like that's not an approach I can take.
I was thinking more of like the people, the anti-ABAers.
Yes.
From the woodwork, or like the really absurd characters. That's what I was thinking. I mean, obviously you take the approach to the audience you're talking to. If it's somebody who has an emotional investment and need in this and whatever, there's gentle ways to go about it. You don't just go full frontal attack and anyone who disagrees with you is the enemy. But
thank you for clarifying. I just want to make sure we're being clear on that.
Absolutely. Yeah. But I mean, like at some point in time though, like there is a point for, is my thing, is that like, yes, of course, you want to be gentle as much as you can. You want to nudge people along. You want to bring them along with you. You want to even do what Fox said and adjust your language. There's the thing where Carl's like the Yoda man. He's like, just be a chameleon, take on whatever words they use and just use them against them, which is like a Jedi mind trick way to get what we want. But I mean, like, the point is that you need to actually be willing, able, and educated enough in your topic or your subject matter to actually engage that discussion, right?
Yeah.
And part of the whole conversation that we've had up until now is like, again, full circle, do we deserve to get autism? I mean, or do we even deserve to branch out? The question is like, well, I mean, have you as an individual, have you done the work, the introspective work to know your lane? and to know what you know and what you don't know, and have you put forth the effort to grow yourself. Everyone's always a work in progress. Again, I'm not perfect. No, none of us are perfect. There's so many things that I don't know about what we do. I know what I know, and I know what I think I know. And I'm willing to stand up for what I think I know, and that's part of it. Again, if you don't respect yourself, no one will respect you. So if someone's being disrespectful, you have not just the right, but you have, in my opinion, you have the obligation to stand up to them and say, listen, not only do I disagree with you, I find what you're saying ridiculous, and here's why. That's reasonable discussion, and that's not disrespectful or wrong. I'm clarifying my statements. I was being hyperbolic for comedic reasons.
Wait, we're being hyperbolic during this?
Right.
That's the thing we're doing?
I think part of it depends on there's different type of content and like approaches that are going to resonate with different people, right? Like in a grand scheme, that sort of stuff is valuable to have out there. It works in the skeptic society, right?
I mean, those are my people.
Yeah, I resonated with that sort of content. It wasn't that I resonated with it the first time I read it, but it started to become very valuable to me and taught me a lot of different perspectives. But yeah, I agree that you can't take that in as a practitioner, Miranda.
Yeah.
And start.
Well, I think, and I don't want to start going into closing unless we're kind of big, but I think we're kind of getting there, which is the through line, I think, with everything we've been discussing across, how do we really appeal to the people that we're interacting with the most within ABA therapy as it is applied to autism treatment? How do we address the issues of our history and the barriers that come with our language? And how do we work with this massive population of direct service workers who, there's the potential to really create some buy-in and create I don't love the metaphor that I keep using here, but, foot soldiers for our science in a lot of ways who really understand and who are willing to go out there for us, and a big thing we've been talking about has been the supervisor, the behavior analyst, our education and our grasp and knowing what we know, knowing what we do know, and really, really being fluent in our concepts and principles. If we're going to really effectively disseminate in the way that Ryan discussed at the start of the show, which is, put forth the information out there and actually create change, if we're going to actually do that. And we also need a better understanding of just complex human behavior in general. And I feel that that's also lacking in our education, language, learning history, culture. There are these contingencies in place that a lot of people, you can pass the BCBA exam without knowing them. They are not on the task list. Really.
You should get a note when you pass your exam. It should say in the email that you get from the board, it should say, congratulations, you have met the minimum requirement, minimal understanding of behavior analytic principles, and you are now qualified to learn more. Good luck on your journey. And that's what it should say.
You're qualified to learn more.
Yeah.
I totally agree. That's hoping. We're hoping to get Bob Ross on to be able, not the painter, the behavior analyst.
I was like, wait, did you necromancy Bob Ross?
To be able to
seance here in the basement.
That's slated as a potential topic. We have some draft points actually. Whether or not it'll come to fruition, we're hoping so. It's just a matter of connecting dots. But yeah, I totally agree, man. It's not meant to be degrading. It's like you are saying that you are a master of behavior. You better be able to do this very well, and that minimum competency is just that. So yeah, I think checking your lane is look in the mirror. And again, this goes to me too. This goes to everybody. Always know what you know and be willing to accept what you don't. But I mean, on the flip side, when you do know something and someone's wrong, don't be afraid to say it. Yeah, if you want to get back into that freedom angle, we all can step back and look at ourselves. The learner's always right. The rat's always right, we say. The question then becomes how are you going to alter and change that?
Super fun. This has been so fun.
This has been a blast, you guys. Thank you.
Miranda.
Was there any topics or points that we missed, Miranda?
I don't think so. I mean, I guess if we just want to summarize, deserve is a tricky word in that question. Do we have, as a science, as a practitioner of this science, should you agree that we should be working in other areas? Yes, because we should be. We have the answers to a lot of problems. I will say too, and I don't know if we hit this hard enough, we are a natural science, and I think we need to be aware of that. Our principles don't exist just when we're present, you know, like there are people that are like they're utilizing what we know. They don't necessarily use the same language, but you see it a lot in the tech world, you know, like they know how reinforcement works. They know how to get clicks. There are people that our science is being utilized without us. And I hope you guys are also covering that, because that's a whole other topic.
You know, we didn't put natural science on there, but we totally should, because that is a very worthwhile discussion, Ryan.
Yeah, no, there are literally schedules of reinforcement that are written into law that are not allowed to be utilized by gambling casinos because they are so damn effective. Like, that is a thing that happens. And the fact that, yeah, if we think we're blind to those sort of things happening, or social media, there are behavior analysts that are working in some of the highest social media companies out there that are unlisted because of the flack and whatnot. And these things are happening. Gamification, there's so many areas.
Exactly. So, I mean, I don't want to be charged with being ignorant and saying that we have not branched out, because we have. And at the very least, our science, if not by name, has branched out. And then there are also behavioral scientists, that are actually branching out and doing those things. But
the question is, yeah, like, I think the question then is, like, how are you doing it, right? And
the ethics of it, yeah.
Yeah.
How are you checking yourself? How are you making sure that you're being principled? How are you following, the various trains of thought and, I guess, decision-making trajectories you should to maintain good quality scientific outcomes that are ethical? I mean,
in a sense, you can learn from anyone branching out. I think could learn from our current mistakes quite heavily, or outcomes, right, in the current industry.
Yeah,
man. Oh yeah, social media is like crazy. It's like a digital Skinner box. It's like so like pop, pop, pop.
So interesting, right? Yeah. Could you imagine Skinner like looking at? He'd go crazy.
He'd roll around his grave. He is rolling in his grave.
He is. But yeah, so I mean, it's, this question, it's a macro question we're asking here, as a field, is this something we need to do? But, just to put it out there on the practitioners, really, it has to be, there are macro ways to address it. And we talked about some systems things that need to happen, for sure. But, just to take it to the streets for yourself, know your science, read, know what you need to know to be the most effective practitioner you can be. And you'll likely achieve a lot at a smaller level, but you will achieve what we're really trying to put forth here, which is you'll have family members who believe in what you're doing and believe the reason that their kid went from not talking to requesting things and went from not looking at them to actually engaging with them and singing songs if you're in early intervention, that they'll understand why that is. And that it's really, really powerful. And I get emotional talking about it because it's so important, It's the little things we create for these stakeholders are so reinforcing. It just doesn't make any sense to me that it's not out there further, and that the fact that we're not communicating it, and that in a way that, and tying it back to those things that are like the biggest reinforcers for them in a way that gets them to then share and apply it further. It doesn't make any sense to me. That is a contingency analysis I cannot figure out.
I think when we talk about the business side of things a little bit, I think that'll definitely address that, because to me, what you just described as a business problem and financial incentives conflicting with our obligation to disseminate.
Yeah.
Because you have people who create proprietary intervention packages, they try to copyright or trade secret stuff that is really free-flowing scientific knowledge, and then they market it in such a way that's very exclusive, which is fine. Again, like, this is America, whatever. It's a different animal. But I think our field has this weird interconnectedness with the business side of it that other natural sciences don't have, I think. Biologists, or whatever, chemists working, it's just, if they work for a big pharma company, maybe they have that conflict, right? But they're working on specific projects.
Well, national science, like funding and endowments, like that can also get tricky, and they can bog down those sciences as well.
Yeah, they can bog them down, but I'm just saying that, like, for personal investment though, like,
Yeah,
it's a little bit different. They're not doing it for the love of the game. You know what I mean? We're not always doing it for the love of the game.
We do that. I literally had an email that was like a $26,000 sign-on bonus package for California like 2 weeks ago. And like the fact that you're marketing that is then talked about elsewhere, and that is why we end up having those sort of problems. The question is how much does it actually affect that larger perception? But I don't know.
I saw that. I saw that
doing
ad,
this ourselves.
Crazy.
Yeah.
That ad was crazy. I saw that. I'm like, $26,000. I was like, New California, maybe. Pretty
California
nice.
cheap. It was Bay Area.
That won't get you very much.
Oh, okay. That's like a McDonald's breakfast, really, if you think about it.
Yeah.
Like half a month.
That's no down payment on anything.
Yeah. Okay.
Don't worry.
That's a frontline worker's wage.
But no, yes,
right?
but
Dude,
that's a yearly salary for a frontline worker.
Yeah, in the Midwest, that's for sure.
But yeah, so like, there are those, there's the wider macro contingencies of our field and our professional organizations. There are the service providers and our companies and how that's being handled as well. And then there's what you can do as an individual practitioner. And that's the most that you can do, right? Like that's the most direct, the behavior that you can change the best is your own. So
yeah.
Know yourself, know how to communicate. Yeah. Know how to communicate, know how to change your own behavior, understand that your credential is minimum competency, and be excited about growing in it.
Yeah, I mean, you signed up for a lifetime.
I had a digital mic. I'd have to put the effect on there where it dropped.
Kaboof. All right, please, wherever you found this, make sure that you go in, comment, tell us how you liked it. Make sure you answer the questions that we left there. And tell a friend, please tag, share. It is the way that we can start to break through the barriers and share what behavior analysis has to offer and have these more meaningful conversations in a public sphere. Remember, also, you can go to anchor.fm/the controversial exchange and call in and leave your thoughts there as well, again, privately, where we will be choosing some of our favorites to air on the Anchor app. Our next episode is on self-management and narrative. Finding your story, communicating your story, what role it has in behavior analysis, dissemination. I think you're going to like it. It's just Dimitri and I riffing. Now, I have a quick fun fact for you. That is, did you know that 1 in 1,300 people, that's right, in 2018, 1 in 1,300 people that actually tuned into the content chose to support or help out. So I mentioned Patreon before this. Patreon.com/thedailyBA is a values-based system that I set up to where if you're enjoying this, you can go in, you can support for as little as $1 a month, and you get some sort of exchange as well. So some people receive this in a video series where you could watch online, see us talking back and forth. Other cool things include tiers like the Daily BA, the closed Facebook group where I share other ideas, resources, things like that. Occasionally I get courses, giveaways to hand out to people. We get discount codes that I share with you. I make that super easy to where you can snag some cheaper rates to big events in behavior analysis. And I've paired up with an amazing artist named Lester who makes these just great, phenomenal, really dope posters of legends in our field that we put out there as well. And you can snag some of those depending on your tier. And occasionally I bring on sponsors through this. I make sure that I communicate that with you. And note to sponsors, it's only if we truly, truly align on our value system. So that's our show. There are currently over 94 people in the Daily BA Patreon closed group that's accessing these sort of things. I'd love for you to join, so really consider going and checking it out. As a gift for signing up, you get access to all the streams from last year of what we actually produce behind the scenes. You can catch Dimitri and I on Twitter at The Controversial X, that's Controversial EX, or on Instagram at The Controversial Exchange. We will be manning these. We will be answering questions and replying and sharing. So that's how you can reach us in between episodes, in addition to Anchor. And to thank you so much to our listeners. You are the reason that we get to do this. The people on Patreon help us support and make it financially possible. But everybody following, liking, and sharing, you all are helping in this grand vision. So thank you. And I have one last thing that I need to read to you, just so that we're all kosher and we're on the same page. And that is, the views expressed during the Controversial Exchange podcast series are solely those of the individuals involved and do not reflect the official policy or position of any other agency, organization, employer, or company. Assumptions made in the analysis are not reflective of the position of any other entity other than the authors, and since we are critically thinking human beings, these views are always subject to change, revision, and rethinking at any time. Please do not hold us to them in perpetuity. This podcast series is to educate and inform, provide discussion, and does not constitute professional advice. That's your controversial exchange.
For the record,